Hello there, time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us are The Independent's chief football writer Miguel Delaney and ESPN's senior writer Mark Ogden. Great to see you, gents. Welcome along. Let's quickly run you through the back pages before we chat. We'll start with the Mirror. And their back page leads with Manchester United. The headline, a more time for Ruben, following those remarkable comments from the minority owner, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. We'll be focusing on that at length in our discussions as well. There's also some interesting quotes from Thomas Tuchel across most of the papers. Lions will be underdogs at next year's World Cup, so says the England head coach. In the Times, they also splash with United. The headline, Ratcliffe, I'll give Amorim 3 years. They also have that underdogs line from Thomas Tuchel. Big cricket news ahead of the Ashes down under. Australia captain Pat Cummins, injury boost England's Ashes chances. That would be huge news if he was to miss that, wouldn't it? And on the Telegraph, a similar collection of stories. Ratcliffe backs Amorim is their headline, and also Tuchel's team talk. England manager doubles down. Yeah, but we'll start with Manchester United. It's on, the back pages there, as we saw, on all of them, really, because this is a pretty remarkable set of quotes from the minority owner of United, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, saying that he wants to give Ruben Amorim 3 more years. He speaks of there being no knee-jerk reaction to the current run of results. And he also spoke of a long-term plan. Miguel, this is a manager that has not won back-to-back Premier League games, has the worst record of Premier League games of any permanent United manager, was knocked out the Carabao Cup this season by League Two Grimsby. What do you make of these quotes, and how shocked are you that, considering where Manchester United are at under Amorim, that he's been given more time?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned minority owner there. Minority owner, majority prominence, given Ratcliffe seems to do a lot of these sort of interviews that make a lot of headlines, particularly enough, not just because of who he is, but because he actually says some quite headline-grabbing things, including this. And I think some of the comments in this are all the more interesting because from speaking to people around the club over the past few weeks, I think there's maybe been an expectation that if there was to be a change, it wouldn't necessarily be because of journalist pressure, as he's conspicuously mentioned, or obviously kind of the football hierarchy like Omar Barada or Jason Wilcox. But I think a lot of people were saying, now of course this was speculation from a lot of people around the club, but I suppose it was pointed that if there was to be a change, it would be because Ratcliffe himself is a famously expectant and demanding man. I mean, there's been a lot of stories about how, say, what he wants from staff at Manchester United since he's been there. And you would think that expectation rises up to the manager, especially as you've mentioned, Jess, how poor the record is. So I wonder, is this actually a bit of a comment on a few levels? One, obviously, yes, to give Amorim more space and quell what has been rising discussion or debate about the manager's future in a difficult start to the season. And two, maybe it's about Ratcliffe himself, maybe, because, I mean, so much of the talk here has been centred on him and maybe his vision for how he wants to run the club.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because we know him as a minority owner, but from what he's saying from this interview, he has majority control over the footballing decisions, because he was asked on this podcast whether, if the Glazers wanted him sacked, Mark, it wouldn't be allowed because he doesn't want him sacked. So he essentially saying that the decision's with me to keep Amorim. It's got nothing to do with the Glazers. He says, we're here, we're local, we've got our boots on the ground at Manchester United. We can make the best decisions. Do you believe that?
Well, that was part of the deal when Ineos acquired their minority stake about 18 months ago, that they would run the football operation. But obviously their kind of mission has crept into other areas. They've overseen the layoffs of people that aren't football staff. So they do seem to be controlling every part of the running of the club right now. But ultimately, the Glazers are the majority owners. And if they want to sell, there'll be a point later this season, maybe next summer, where they can sell without even consulting Ineos. So, yeah, so Jim Ratcliffe is right in the sense that they are running the football club. But ultimately, money talks, and the people that have got the money in the club, well, and certainly the biggest stake are the Glazers. So it can say all he likes. And I guess when push comes to shove, if Joe and Avi Glazer decide that results aren't going too well, they will have an opinion. I know that Joe Glazer is still involved. Now, the situation is, as we know, that over the years when the Glazers had the decision themselves, they still took a long time to make the decision in terms of getting rid of managers. Every manager that United have sacked since Sir Alex Ferguson has pretty much outstayed their their usefulness in the sense that the results were declining way before they were sacked. So, even they aren't the quickest at getting rid of managers. But when Jim Ratcliffe says he's going to give Amorim 3 years, or he deserves 3 years, he ain't going to get 3 years. If the results continue as they are, there's no way that he gets 3 years, because, Man United would be, again, bottom half of the Premier League if they're, obviously they beat Brentford at the weekend. Sorry, they had a win at the weekend, but the results are bad results, and they're not being the Man United that we expect. They're not challenging for the top 4, the top 6. So you can't survive in 3 years if that's the case. So we'll wait and see. I do remember this time last year, Erik ten Hag was, struggling a little bit, and Jim Ratcliffe said he's a great coach, and I like him as a person. And 3 weeks later, he was sacked. So let's wait and see.
Yeah, let's wait and see. Back at the Guardian, they've gone with that headline, that key phrase that I mentioned from Ratcliffe there: no knee-jerk action. Ratcliffe declares Amorim has 3 years at Old Trafford. But Miguel, United have picked up 37 points from 34 league games under Amorim. Is that knee-jerk?
No, absolutely not. I mean, they've been tracking about just over a point per game since he took the job. I mean, it's approaching a year now. We're a month shy of a year with Amorim. And there hasn't really been any uptick, at least in terms of results. And I suppose this, despite all the kind of, the talk at the end of last season, but good times are coming, the signings they made. Now, look, that some of that is quite superficial. Well, it's not the signings, but certainly some of the talk. Now, I suppose within that context, there is something bigger here for United, which is the conscious need to actually escape this cycle of, for a club, especially post-Ferguson, that was so attached to the idea of the manager being such a central figure and not getting so bound up in such a figure. They wanted to get out of this thing of always having to restart again. Now, but does that mean that sticking with someone who isn't right is the right decision? I have to say, one thing I've always thought about Amorim, and I was at that Brentford game that United lost last week, which did feel another nadir before we had another swing back, and it does feel like that's going to be the story of the season. But I know Amorim has obviously got a lot of criticism for dogmatically sticking to a certain formation, and I think there's a bit of an irony to that, because in some ways, every time I sit there and you listen to him speaking at a press conference, I actually think he's got the personality and charisma for a United job, in that he does seem quite unflappable. He doesn't allow any of this to affect him, with the irony being that doesn't mean it means it doesn't affect a formation that clearly looks wrong. But I have always felt with Amorim, I have to say, that he's almost kind of in this job too early. And I don't mean from the perspective of his career or his age. I mean that he's the sort of coach that would suit a club that had taken many more steps to get where they should be in United. That he's someone that could have come down into this project a few years down the line. And because they've had so much to fix, that Ratcliffe has spoken about himself, I have often wondered whether a dogmatic coach like him is the right person for the situation, when clearly in the situation they're in now, they have so many different elements to solve. It does feel like one where you want more of a pragmatist, someone who can adapt more to exactly what they're given. I suppose you might call it pure management. Now, like, the obvious option there is Glasner. Not that Palace would let him go this season. But whereas Amorim might be someone better suited for a situation where they have the squad closer to what they'd want, or closer to this style of football. But then I suppose maybe this actually feeds into what Ratcliffe said a little bit, because if that's the outlook, then 3 years is probably what you're going to need. You just might have to tolerate a lot of pain in that time.
Yeah, he does have a very interesting relationship, you're right, with the British media, doesn't he? Interesting as well from Ratcliffe that he made the comparison between Amorim and Arteta, who he says struggled in his first few seasons at Arsenal. Mark, what do you make of that comparison? Is that even suitable? Because Arteta, yes, he may have struggled, as Arsenal standards were very high when he came in, but he did win a trophy quite early on.
Arteta did struggle early on. You're right, he won the FA Cup quite early, but the season two after that, it wasn't really going anywhere. I remember he had a terrible start to, I think, his third season, and it looked like he was under pressure. I think he lost 2 games heavily, and he was really wobbling, and obviously Arsenal stuck by him. But it did struggle. But I think Arsenal at the time, they had a sense of progress, and I think Arteta did a lot of things that Amorim has tried to do, in the sense of getting rid of high-earning players that weren't performing. But, Arsenal weren't coming from the same level of expectation that I guess Amorim's under at United, because I think certainly when Arteta took over, Unai Emery had been at Arsenal and they'd had that decline under Arsene Wenger. So Arsenal had kind of dropped off a cliff a little bit in terms of not being in the Champions League for quite a while. They hadn't won enough trophies. They hadn't challenged for the league since 2004. So it's kind of a different level of pressure. I think they were more prepared or more able to play a long game at Arsenal than they are at United. I mean, United's cycle is basically 6 months and it seems to be crash and burn all the time. I understand Ratcliffe's point that he needs 3 years, and I think Amorim gets 3 years if there's a sign of progress all the way through, and if he shows the kind of Arteta style progress that he's shown the last 2 or 3 years, then great. But what is that progress? How is that progress measured? Is it qualifying for Europe this season? Is it qualifying for the Champions League next season? And then is it pushing for the title? That is progress. But Man United is such an impatient club because they are used to huge success, and I guess United are almost also caught in that trap of, Sir Alex Ferguson was given 3.5 years, but he won his first trophy. So we stick with managers, and that's what's going to happen. But that was nearly 40 years ago. The game's changed completely. So you can't use that same metric to measure Ruben Amorim because it worked with Sir Alex Ferguson back in 1990.
Yeah, I didn't realise patience was a thing in modern football management. Miguel, what do you make then of what the fans' reaction might be to this? Will they be soothed by the fact that Sir Jim Ratcliffe says he does have a long-term vision here? He does want to invest in the club. He does want Amorim to be a success, and he doesn't want to go through this process of every 2 or 3 seasons getting rid of another Manchester United manager.
Well, I mean, the fans, it's an interesting one because I think, any honeymoon period that Ratcliffe had after the initial takeover of the minority share is long gone, especially with a lot of the discussion over ticket prices and also a lot of the way the club has been run. With Amorim, as is the case with most Manchester United, it's obviously been much longer running. There was a little bit of a sense of a mood shifting, especially around the Brentford game. But as we know, United fans are reluctant to go in on a manager, particularly, I suppose, because of that cultural identity of the club, as Mark referenced there about Alex Ferguson and that, always that feeling that this is a club that does get behind their coach, that they try not to turn on him. So maybe this will be one element that the fans don't mind too much, so long as results are right. But yeah, I mean, to pick up on the Ferguson point as well, as Mark said, I know we're going to discuss England's golden generation later as well. And it is another one of these discussions where it always comes up in these times. It just feels like, exactly as Mark said, it just feels completely the wrong frame of reference for modern football. It has transformed. I don't think this is actually about patience. It's about the modern economic framework of the game and how a club that, remember, Ratcliffe himself has brought this up, a club that has as high a revenue as Manchester United can pay the wages that Manchester United do, even if they come down in the last 2 years. I mean, that brings a level of expectation because of direct correlation between finance and performance in the modern game in 2025, and which is just one reason why it's completely different to the Ferguson era. Also, one thing to say on Arteta as well, he did 2 years into that job because it was going badly. He completely changed his first 11 and obviously brought in a lot of the younger players in Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe. I think that signalled a bit of a vibe shift for Arsenal. And also, he did compromise in his approach in the first 2 years of his time there, specifically because he didn't have the players to do exactly what he wanted. And that took time. I think there are 2 significant differences with United right now. Also, from speaking to people at Arsenal, I know it's been brought up to them how United have looked at Arsenal as a potential example. Yeah, I think some people at Arsenal think they haven't exactly followed what Arsenal did in that time. Now, as Mark said, they are different clubs.
Yeah, they really are at the moment, aren't they? Miguel did mention the finances there, Mark. I wonder how ruthless you feel that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been with the finances at the club. Record revenues for Manchester United, of course. Does that make them more stable off the pitch, at least?
Well, the revenues have gone up, but if you look at United's revenues over recent years, they've really kind of gone up very slowly compared to where they were maybe 10 years ago. They're still making lots of money, but they haven't grown as big as Man City and Liverpool have in recent years. So that's because they haven't been, competing in the Champions League or winning Premier League. So their earnings have gone down. So I understand why Jim Ratcliffe had to make cuts. Man United's staffing levels were and still are much higher than their Premier League rivals. But, there's a lot to do at United. I think they're in a bit of a catch-22 situation. They can't start generating more money off the pitch until they start winning on it. But they can't start winning on it until they start generating more money off the pitch to bring in better players, pay bigger wages. So, it is difficult. And I understand that, Amorim is in a tough job, but ultimately it gets back to the situation that results aren't good enough. And if you are tracking on relegation form as Man United manager after almost a year in charge, it is a bit weird to be told you've got 3 years in the job.
Yeah, the two go hand in hand. Finances, results and finances. Mark Miguel, for the moment, thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be looking at more of the sports stories in the morning's newspapers, including this in the Times. We must play like underdogs, says Tuchel. We will focus on the England head coach and his comments ahead of that friendly with Wales at Wembley. Welcome back. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and welcome back to the Independent's chief football writer Miguel Delaney and ESPN's senior writer Mark Ogden. Let's talk England, gents. Let's go to the back of the Mirror. Headline, simple on this one. Lions will be underdogs, so says the England head coach Thomas Tuchel. Is this a case, Miguel, of Thomas Tuchel just tempering expectations? Are they really underdogs?
I wouldn't say it, actually. I think, he's talking about using the spirit. And also, I do wonder if there's a purely tactical thing here, given that England don't have that passing midfielder that the probable favourites for the tournament, Spain, do. So that's one area where you do have to think like underdogs. But to be honest, I think more realistically with Tuchel, I go to about 80% of his media briefings and the kind of, the squad announcements, the press conference before the games or after games. I wasn't at today's, but one of the things he does do in these, actually, like, to be fair to Tuchel, and this is one of the things I quite like about him, he enjoys talking about football and throwing out ideas. And obviously, the kind of, in the relaxed atmosphere this takes, especially with the kind of the written press before games, he'll get a question thrown at him and he'll take it on face value and answer how he sees fit or what he thinks. So I wouldn't take this as Tuchel using it as kind of, a guiding principle for his team. I think it's more, I suppose, about an element that England can use. And that's a lot of what he's thinking about right now, and that he's trying to build a tournament team, a team that can navigate the various challenges of a tournament, which will involve using a lot of different qualities. And as he does that, Tuchel, he doesn't mind actually telling the press a lot of the different things he's thinking about in the way I think he caused a few headlines last month by talking about how he plans to use long throws.
Yeah, that was interesting, wasn't it? There's an honesty to him that makes him quite interesting to listen to in press conferences. Back page of The Sun as well, also covering this. We're not top pick, says Tuchel. What do you think of this, Mark? What's your take on... Because Tuchel often talks, doesn't he, about building a team rather than simply a collection of individuals? Yeah,
I mean, listen, if he's trying to turn the pressure down, it's just not going to work because, myself, Miguel, everybody else that works in the media, when you get to World Cup or Euros, then you look at the players that England have got and they will be a contender. Now, they've been contenders over the years, but they haven't quite pulled it off. But they've been to the last 2 Euros finals. They went to a semi-final at the World Cup in 2018, quarter-final and lost to France in 2022. So they've been knocking on the door. And you look at the players they've got, the players that are competing regularly in the Champions League at the highest level in the toughest league in the world. So England should be one of the favourites. But I don't know how he's kind of quantifying underdogs. Does he mean when they go to the tournament and just getting through the group and getting to the latter stages, or is he saying when they're playing the likes of France, Spain, Argentina, Brazil? Because they're probably the only 4 teams that England will be underdogs against. So, I don't know, underdogs to reach the semi-finals final, maybe, but I don't think you can go into a tournament as an England head coach or manager saying, look guys, we're not one of the favourites, we're one of the underdogs. It doesn't really fit with the players they've got, and he's supposed to have been brought in to be the missing link. He's the guy that we've got this great bunch of players and that we needed a world-class coach with Champions League winning pedigree. That's Thomas Tuchel, and all of a sudden he's saying that England are underdogs. That doesn't quite stack up. He's the guy that should be taking England the next step. So, yeah, it's a different approach, but I don't think it'll work. I don't think it'll last. I don't think he can possibly go to the World Cup saying England are underdogs.
Yeah, imagine that, England going to a major tournament and not being under some sort of pressure. Staying with the back page of The Sun, because Mark Gay's also been speaking to the media, and they carry the quote on the top banner there of the page. These guys are your best friends, your teammates, the lads you go to war with. There's a real sense of camaraderie about this England side, Miguel.
Yeah, and of course, a line like this, not that I think Gahey meant it in this way, but it takes on a different dimension because obviously it was only a few days ago that Tuchel was talking about how he actually left out Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden and Jack Grealish because he really enjoyed the chemistry and the spirit shown in the last camp. And clearly this is a message that's being drilled into the players that in order to be in a Tuchel squad from here until the World Cup, you've got to, fit in with certain standards that are expected around the group, behavioural standards as much as pure football standards. And it does feel like, as Gahey has shown there, given that Gahey has become one of the leaders of this team, not least for his growth as a player at Crystal Palace, that it's something the players are thinking about as well. And actually, I do think this fits into the underdog point a little bit as well, because, I mean, to my mind, what Tuchel is maybe getting at there is that, I mean, when you go to tournaments, which teams you usually notice the spirit about? It's usually either the champions or overperforming smaller countries, that underdog mentality. And I wonder, is Tuchel trying to generate that, the sort of team spirit that we usually associate with that? And obviously this is something that Gareth Southgate was big on in the build-up to England's, I suppose, kind of history-changing or modern history-changing tournament in 2018. It was about changing the spirit of the group and the psychology of the group.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention now to Steven Gerrard, because there's a possibility that he might be back in Great Britain coaching here, this time in Scotland, back to a place he knows very well. Back page of the Scottish Sun here, FaceTime. Gerrard will meet Ibrox Chiefs today. This is an interesting one. Gerrard going back to Rangers, obviously had a pretty successful spell there, won the Scottish Premiership in 2021. Mark, what do you feel about this decision by Gerrard, if he is to take the job? Is he the man to turn the club's fortunes around? They've really gone through it this early part of the season.
I think he's certainly the manager that will unite the fan base, because they were never behind Russell Martin. They wanted a guy that knows the club, that is a winner, and Steven Gerrard has got all those credentials. But I think it's more a case of he has to be persuaded that he's going back to a club that is ready to compete, because Rangers have been terrible this season, and obviously Celtic have missed out of the Champions League, but Celtic have still outspent Rangers quite heavily. They've got Brendan Rodgers in charge, who knows the league. So Steven Gerrard won't want to go to Rangers unless he knows he can compete, and that is the issue, because they've got a new ownership group now since Gerrard was there 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, I do think he's had a bit of a rough ride in terms of his reputation. He did a great job at Rangers, being billed as a potential next Liverpool manager, next England manager. Went to Aston Villa, didn't quite work out, and all of a sudden his reputation's been trashed because he had a bad year at Villa, and Unai Emery came in and did well. But went to Saudi Arabia, didn't have a great time there. But I think Steven Gerrard deserves a second chance at a big job, and I think Rangers is the big job. But ultimately, it could prove to be a stepping stone for Steven Gerrard to get a big job that he can see that in England, or maybe even down the line the England job. So he needs to get back in football at some point. I think Rangers is a good job for him if he gets convinced by the owners that they're serious about challenging Celtic.
Yeah, Miguel, we're just coming to time. Not an awful lot of time left, but this will be a popular choice if he is to take it with the fans, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Max mentioned there, Russell Martin, it was just never a fit for all manner of reasons. Whereas Gerrard, I mean, talk about whatever about a fit. This is someone who's actually won their last title, so there is a rallying point around him, and he has been a recent club hero. And yeah, it is. I mean, he's also a bit of a unity candidate in that regard that the club probably needs right now, because we have seen some ugly scenes around Martin over the last while.
Yeah. Miguel, Mark, thank you for your company. Miguel Delaney and Mark Ogden, thank you very much for joining us on Backpages. If you missed any of the shows, another chance to see Backpages at hour. It's also available as a podcast. Just download Backpages or Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And of course, you can join us again on Thursday, where our guests will be Jonathan Liu and Charlotte Dunker.